Hello, everyone. My name is Viola Brugnatelli, and I work for helping cannabis professionals, healthcare professionals mainly, to understand something about cannabis and actually use it in their practice.
We must work untiringly so that our children are obliged to learn the truth. Because it is only through knowledge that we can safely protect them.
Curious About Cannabis is dedicated to providing reliable cannabis science education to anyone curious enough to learn. To get access to free courses and other educational resources, visit learn.cacpodcast.com and become a Curious About Cannabis member for free. The Curious About Cannabis book provides an incredible crash course in cannabis science through over 500 pages of content filled with photos, activities, science experiments, games, and more to help guide you through your personalized cannabis education journey. This book has become a trusted textbook in colleges and universities across North America and is absolutely perfect for serious learners, as well as cannabis educators, bud tenders, clinicians, patients, and caregivers. And special thanks to the many individuals, companies, and organizations that have helped Curious About Cannabis meet our mission of becoming the #1 trusted source of cannabis science education on the planet. This includes organizations like Credo Science with Ethan Russo, the Kenigma, Treadwell Farms, the Spellman Report with Kevin Spellman, The Workshop, Green Earth Medicinals, CBD National, Magnolia Botanicals, and more. Visit cacpodcast.com/sponsors to learn about our sponsors and go show them some love for helping us spread cannabis science education far and wide to anyone curious enough to learn. If you like Curious About Cannabis, consider checking out some of these other learning initiatives by Natural Learning Enterprises.
Life, mysterious and ephemeral, breathtaking, yet fierce and unyielding, grounding, yet transcendent. It's a curious thing. Let's explore it together. Isn't Life Curious? Available at isn'tlifecurious.com or wherever you experience podcasts.
And now, back to the show. So, how would you, to someone who has never heard of a G protein coupled receptor before, how would you describe what they are and why they're important?
GPCR receptors basically is just a way on how a receptor is working. So first of all, where are they located? Mainly receptors are on cell membranes. They can either open like a channel, so in that case they're called ionotropic receptors, or otherwise they can start and activate cascades. And just to make it really understandable, the G-coupled protein, the G protein is a type of protein that can have subdomains. Usually cannabinoid receptors are associated with more inhibitory subdomains. But what's relevant is that instead of opening and closing the membrane, they mainly initiate secondary cascades. And GPCR receptors are widespread among the body. They're incredibly present. And actually, the most present GPCR in the brain is CB1 receptor, so cannabinoid receptor. So that's our focus with the interest in endocannabinoid system.
Well,
But this is not to say that there are no ionotropic receptors within the endocannabinoidome, as was this preventing your second question probably. I think it's really fascinating that when we look at what is cannabinoid receptors, we have gone beyond the definition of CB1 and CB2. For example, myself, I come from this group of researchers that have been trying to find the CB3 So we have been looking at the CB3 amongst a class of GPCRs that are called orphan. The reason they are orphan is not because they don't have parents, but actually they don't have ligands. They have ligands, we just don't know which are their endogenous ligands. And so my job was kind of trying to find who was the ligand, the endogenous ligand of some of these receptors, because the belief was, and still is, that receptors like GPR55 or GPR18 or even GPR92 are presumably associated with the endocannabinoid system at large. But as I said just now, the vast network of receptors of the endocannabinoid system does not only confine into these two GPCR. There is ionotropic, but there is also receptors that are positioned in the nuclei, in the membrane of the nuclei, like PPAR gamma, or PPAR, with all of their subunits. And so all of these different classes of receptors, why do we call them? They're not necessarily cannabinoid receptors. Like, for example, vanilloid receptors, they can be considered cannabinoid receptors, but they are not called in that way because originally the people that, like me, are trying to de-orphanize them. What they found out was that actually a different class of plant molecules were activating the vanilloid receptor. So that's why the name vanilloid rather than cannabinoid is mainly on what's the first molecule that we find out that can activate them.
Well, and it's funny sometimes the role that the nomenclature can play and how we often think about receptors, cannabinoid receptors, vanilloid receptors, all of these different types of receptors that often get named such based on how they were discovered or the types of functions that they're found to have. And sometimes I think it makes us think of these things as more separate than they actually are. And when you just think about G protein coupled receptors and ionotropic receptors more broadly and think about their connections, which is why I was really excited to talk to you today, because getting past the sort of simple concept of CB1, CB2 and trying to highlight just how complex the endocannabinoidome is and how interconnected a lot of these signaling systems are, it does transcend this sort of idea of what is a cannabinoid receptor, or, how does cannabis or a cannabinoid elicit its effects. It does go beyond the sort of cannabinoid nomenclature into all of these other realms, which is really what I wanted to shine light on today. And I wanted to ask you, how did you get into this field? Like, what draw you into trying to study these orphan G protein coupled receptors and to try to understand, sort of their place in physiology?
Totally. I'll come to this question, but I wanted to endorse what you just said about names, because at the end of the day, it seems a little detail, but actually communication and wording that we use, it's really important. So I remember, for example, in the ICRS of many years ago, I would say 2011, it was proposed to call molecules that activate, because endocannabinoids are eicosanoids. So it was proposed to call it like eicosanoid system in order to reduce the impact on the ear, for example, of parent of a child that then is going to use a medicine that contain cannabinoids or cannabinoid therapy, to have to call that sort of like eicosanoid therapy or something like that. So it would sound kind of less scary in a sense, like, it's something I don't really know, so it sounds medical enough and does not have the name cannabis in it. So I think it's really important. And also in science, I've been fascinated on how you can call the same thing with different names depending on whether you are a genetist. You're going to call, CNR1, but then if you're like a pharmacologist, then you're going to call the same thing just CB1. And the same, I had the same kind of issue working with orphan receptors, because sometimes you just get lost. You're just really talking about the same thing. I would call them on base, basically, of their function. So rather than say, GPR18, I would call it LPI, because
Yeah.
that's the ligand that activates it, but not me, like my group and all of our group.
Yeah.
And I think this creates, this separation as well between groups, and which from outside it can seem like, oh, they're all scientists, but at the end of the day, within science, even within the same topic, we are in completely different worlds, whether you're like trying to identify what's the gene behind a protein, what's that protein doing, what are the biological effects, and maybe new drug or development of new drug or screening of already existing compounds onto that receptor. They're completely different type of scientists that are doing these things. And the moment they start to call the same thing in different with different names, more separation comes about. There's more difficulty, I believe, into actually having a certain synergetic work, which is so needed for something like cannabis. And so this issue is that completely, potentiated when we talk about cannabis. So we really have some real conversations, and I appreciate what's ASTM doing on this, on setting, nomenclature standards, because otherwise, I have people that are calling me hemp oil, something that maybe another person is calling me cannabis oil, and so we just completely get lost. And so thank you for pointing this out. This topic of the language, very Orwell inspired, but I think it's important.
Yeah, I think so.
How did I come about studying this? Well, I was at the time I was still an undergraduate, and I was studying neuropharmacology in Scotland, which is a place that has been doing quite a lot of work in the pharmacology of cannabinoid receptors. And for me, it was kind of a no-brainer at the time. I was still in my convinced that I would become an electrophysiologist or I don't know, pharmacogenetics. Pretty much any topic that was presented to me, I was like, yes, I will do it. My 5 PhD on it. Like, I love it. I just generally love studying. If I could do this like full time, I would do it. And then we finally had a class of neurobiology or drug addiction, and in that class, finally, it was presented the whole topic on the endocannabinoid system. And there it just clicked that that's actually really what I wanted to do. And then there was like the usual summer internship opening. There were like 5 or 6 labs for a number of students, so that there was like a very tight selection. And usually what was suggested to kind of like the good students was to try and attempt to get into one of these positions, but at least to put a few selections so that you could have it. But for me, it was like a no-brainer. I just want to go in the lab where they're working with cannabinoid receptors. I'm just going to put this option because there are no other option for me. And I got the job. I got the job. Wow. And then that summer, actually, I got 2 scholarships for that because I had the beginner's strike luck working on GPR18. And so from there, it was just a no-brainer that was going to be the route. But I got to say that after a few years of a very unglamorous work, because at the end of the day, being in the darkness of the lab, it's a very, especially for an extrovert, it's a very tough job, staying many hours in silence, and most of the time in the darkness. I've been doing a lot of work on fluorescence and then with rats. So all of these components, they kind of need darkness. I realized that also I was very interested in translating all of this work that was so beyond I'm not saying that preclinical science is not important. Preclinical science is fundamental because it's replying to questions that most of the time companies or who is just looking basically at the profit side won't even focus on, but without the basic knowledge, we cannot really go anywhere. So what I'm saying was that I had the feeling that we were going so kind of far with the science, but we were still not addressing kind of fundamental issues that were happening. So on one side, I had this like very dystopic situation of, whoa, we are here already looking at the potential of CB3. And for example, I come from Italy, and every time I would go for vacation or something, I would go back in Italy, realize that over there was starting to be a medical cannabis law. And like, no, like people were still completely convinced that it was like a very dangerous narcotic. So I was like, okay, this is all great, but it could start to become just something for the sake of saying, writing a really amazing paper with a really amazing name that only probably 5 people on earth can understand and read. And it's all kind of for our own ego sort of thing, rather than actually being of service to, that's so many people that could benefit from the basis of this knowledge. And so that was what made me shift from the just hardcore science work into how do I translate this and make it available for people and use what I know and my skills so that I can convey this message onto people.
Oh yeah, and that's what really grabbed my attention, was seeing a lot of the outreach and education work that you were doing. And it's something that I empathize with greatly, because that's sort of how I see some of my role, as this translational interface between the science and research and everyday people, and trying to bridge those gaps. And I'm so glad that you highlighted this issue that is really common in academia and certain type, especially in like biomedical, biotech research and stuff. This idea of the game is to, do research. So you write these awesome papers, you get a good impact factor, and you sort of just kind of keep this wheel going of publication for publication's sake to try to get reputation points, and it's a game that a lot of people don't really talk about explicitly, I feel like, and especially for younger people that are wanting to enter the sciences in different ways and are trying to understand what professions are actually out there and what they're getting into. I know that when I was going through undergrad and grad school, it was not really made clear to me that was sort of, that it's so easy to get into that cycle without kind of stepping back and asking fundamental philosophical questions about, what are we doing? How are we impacting our communities? And how do we, connect with people rather than just sort of operate kind of off in our little lab dungeons, which is what we do. It's what we get sucked into. And so I think that's really important to highlight. And a few things I wanted to come back around on. One, the icosanoid thing. It's so funny you brought that up, because when I talk to more, I guess, kind of conservative physicians, that's the route I take to try to talk about cannabinoids without setting off any red flags. Just talk about icosanoids and and icosanoid signaling, and they know about that, and it provides a framework to kind of insert these things into that doesn't have the same sort of stigma or taboo. But then that leads into my next question, which is, what kinds of friction or stigma have you encountered as you've taken this step, really out of the lab and into the the public square, so to speak, and to try to help people understand, because there's really, there's hyperbole that comes from both sides of the issue when it comes to cannabis and cannabinoids and their therapeutic potential. So can you speak a little bit of that? What was your experience initially, and how has that kind of evolved as you've, really taken on that position of translator?
Thank you. That's a tough one. I look, the first one has been setting up postgraduate course at the University of Padua. And I remember the day that we had the department having to take a decision over approving or not this course. We were in the corridor, myself and the professor with whom we initiated this initiative. And we were in the corridor, we were walking towards the room of where the department would have had this meeting. And they were literally some colleagues on the way that were greeting us like this, that we were the stoners.
Yeah.
And that was a very welcoming setup. So you can imagine that from there on to where we're now, we kind of seen it all, not just from the outside, because that's kind of expected. I mean, in any of the countries where I'm currently in Spain, but in any of the countries among here in Europe, there is no single government that is, supporting this. So
Yeah.
you know already that politically it's not going to be easy. You know that's going to reflect, for example, in my private company, Italian company is now uh, I just realized the other day that it's more than 5 years that it's going on, and I'm like, wow, am I
Wow.
this old?
Wow.
Like, wow. But I mean, this of course reflects as well with the economic non-support by your country and so on. But I think probably for me, one of the toughest one in terms of difficulties and so on, it's actually been internal issue. So
Mm.
the thing is that my phenotype is that of a woman looking young. And maybe not so much like someone that just comes from a lab all the time. And this
Sure.
has
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
been a problem. And so for the first few years, I just had to go through all of these very judgmental looks of what does this girl wants, like, and it's been really funny as an experience because most of these amazing, great manager of the business industry were from very big companies that were kind of treating us as completely irrelevant without understanding that actually we were a very important key for avoiding what then happened, because the majority of big companies in Italy then had to pack and leave because they completely, yeah, they didn't make it to survive Italy,
Yeah.
basically. We just persevere in our work with a lot of persistence and confidence that we were doing the right thing. And at the end of the day, I'm still here. It's been more than 10 years working in this industry, and most of these people, I don't really see them even working in the industry anymore. So
That's
what I'm
right.
saying is,
Yeah.
the funny part of all of this is that you expect that with the Department of Oncology of the very famous hospital, there is going to be the difficult part, right? I remember the first time that I was invited in this meeting in Italy for it's like the College of Medical Doctors, because we then gathered a lot of institutional support actually. But of course, to gather all of this institutional support, I went through a lot of screening from all of these institutions, and I remember that I was like a little not worried, but like a little anxious, okay, before entering there, because I knew I would get roasted on pretty much any topic that already, like the addiction topic, the adolescent topic, all of these topics that we already know. So and so you're kind of prepared for that, and actually went super smooth, and we've been supported by some of the most important institutions for medical doctors and universities in Italy. But the lack of support for real, and sometimes even the block has come from the industry itself. I'm really
Interesting.
sorry to say this, because
Yeah.
I wish I was to say something else, but because I feel majority of this industry does not operate, even though it says, when I'm talking about industry, I'm talking about the medical
Yeah.
side of it,
Yeah.
okay? So, and despite I'm talking about the medical side, the majority of these companies are operating with also people operating within these companies with no background in pharma, with no
Yeah. Yeah.
background in medicine. So they stop at the appearance because they cannot address the content basically. And so they lack the understanding that you cannot market activate anything within medicine or healthcare if you don't work in the same way that actually pharma has been doing. Like there is no point of reinventing the wheel in there. and thinking you can operate as it was a consumer goods. I mean, it works if it's a consumer good, but then we're talking about a different type of market. So
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, I know it's not amazing for who's listening, probably from within this industry, but I think it's also important to have a self-check
Yeah.
on ourselves, and kind of like trying to understand where and when are we bringing with ourselves a bias, because we always do anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's always a bias. Yeah. And our goal is to try to be as self-aware as possible. Um, no, I think that's a really good point. And what are some of the most common, I guess, misunderstandings that you run into when, um, when you're facing some of these audiences that are kind of going to be more skeptical or more resistant to hearing what you have to say? What are some of those kind of common ideas or misunderstandings that you kind of have to combat over and over again? You kind of
I
mentioned a
think,
couple.
yeah, I think, for example, one of my happiest achievement, although absolutely not monetary, because it was for a public hospital in Italy, so you can imagine. It was actually, so we have this type of public, they are part of public healthcare, and they're distributed nationwide, and basically they're a center for harm reduction. And these centers that are run nationally, they're kind of famous to be, the one that will enforce you methadone and will tell you that even if you drink 2 coffees a day, you are an addict, which
Yeah.
in a sense is true, okay? But I think the real problem of addiction is understanding what is deteriorating your life and your
Yes. Yeah.
capacity to, run a happy life with good quality of life. So if those 2 coffees a day are ruining your life and your ability to have a work and have relationships, then okay, I understand. But then otherwise, the problem is not the substance, it's the use of the substance. And so for me, one of the biggest achievements was actually 2 or 3 years ago was holding this large lecture in Bologna to psychiatrists and neuropsychologists of this center that, of course, have been enforcing these ideas onto their patients for years, talking about actually cannabis for a way to reduce the use of opioids during the harm reduction procedures. And of course, you can imagine how it all started with them completely, like for them, of course, cannabis was one of the issues that their patients have.
Right. Right.
And
Yep.
at the end of the session, some of them actually then now they're writing me and they're documenting me how they're using it for quite successfully actually to drop off as well methadone, because then otherwise there is that problem of having like years and years and years of
Yeah.
methadone. And so I think it's really about arriving already with understanding of who's your audience and understanding what are going to be the key points that they want to address, they need to address, what are their issues, and how I'm going to help them out solving these issues. So for example, for us, we listed the type of specialties amongst doctors that are easiest or most difficult to speak to. So just to give you an example, we found, and I believe it's the same in your part of the world too, but you'll tell me about it. In this part of the world, the easiest specialists to talk to are pain therapy doctor, anesthesiologist, but also dentist. And the reason it's so, because these are type of doctors that are very used to prescribe much more narcotic drugs than cannabis.
Yeah.
That's, so for them, it's kind of like, wow, very, very safe therapeutic window. Wow, this is actually a pretty sound
Right.
compound,
Compared to everything they normally work with.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah. I mean, they just look with benzos and opiates, and this is amazing. And on the other spectrum, what we found as some of the most difficult group of specialists to talk to are cardiologists, because of course, as you know, I think cannabinoids actually can hold a very, very important place for cardiovascular disorders, but you need to really know the pharmacodynamics of cannabinoids. Otherwise, you can create issues in a patient with cardiovascular disorders. So there, most of the time they kind of stop at it can create issues. I'm just not going to
Yeah.
use it, and this is evil. And yeah, like kind of. And then the other as well two groups that we found kind of hard to open conversation, but they're finally starting to wrap around it. Paradoxically, because are two of the groups that could support the most the access for medical cannabis is actually oncologists and neurologists. Because as you know, like these two big areas address so many of the symptom management that cannabis can give relief to, but tend to be kind of the type of doctors that are not so willing to reopen their understanding of the body after they've been taught, medicine in a way that did not include the endocannabinoid system. So the only thing that they see about cannabis, I'm not, obviously this is a generalization, I'm not talking about everyone, but the only way they see cannabis most of the time, it's like it's a narcotic, so why would I want to add, something toxic basically into my patient that is already ongoing a quite serious illness, because either I'm in oncology or I'm in neurology, the situation is quite important. So in this case, and this has been a bit of trial and error, but also recommended to me by doctors themselves, it's really starting from the end. So that's why, for example, in the book that we're going to release soon, we also added on top of, okay, this is all the science, this is all the literature, but then I really wanted to add case studies from doctors around the world. And this is what I mean with starting from the end. It's like, look, this is not a magic bullet, but look at this situation and look at this other situation. And I am not trying, and no one is trying to claim here that this is curing anything. This is, but if we just want to look at symptom management, look all the things, like when you go to an oncologist, I think before addressing the potential, because I think it's really important to address the potential of cannabinoids for cancer therapy as a therapy on its own, as a pro-apoptotic therapy. But the first step, it really needs to be like, okay, you would prescribe A, B, C, D to just as a palliative, basically to support decrease of nausea, increase of appetite, decrease of pain, improvement of mood, decrease of insomnia. So you can substitute all of these with one compound. Isn't that amazing? And actually then you have, all of these people and all of these case studies and all of these studies that are telling you that the patient itself is better. So why wouldn't we try and address this situation? And then as you start to, I find it that it's kind of like step by step. So I've been going through this with personal journeys of friends and their doctors. And so in that case, I was like, can you speak to my doctor? Yes, but I won't say everything, I just let him start and starts to see the results. It's like, I'm not trying to push in all of this information all at once. I
just
also
let the data kind of tell the story for you. Need
to loop them on some final results that they're struggling to obtain, and then from there kind of like build it up, because otherwise it's going to be a really long conversation if we look at, but for a fibromyalgic patient, it's going to be so useful cannabinoids because actually we see that there are, palmitoid, etanolamide levels that are lower and so on. Like, it's such a long conversation. Then they may think that you're trying to say that you rescue the disorder, which you can. I believe you can in some instances, because, for example, for GI issues, many of them, you can obtain a rescuing of the disorder. So, and I know many ex-cancer patients that would tell you this, but unfortunately, we don't have the solid science to tell you. So, does it really make a difference to your patient if we say that his pathology hasn't recovered, but actually he or she does not experience any of the symptoms?
Right.
If you as a doctor are feeling more comfortable into this, and at the same time we're managing to help the patient, so it goes back to language choice. And it's funny, like recently, actually, I had a doctor from Switzerland that is one of our students that just was about to do the exam and just text me saying, I finished all the classes, I'm about to do the exam, but I'm very confused about what one of the doctor in the course said, because the doctor kept repeating that, this is just symptom management and it's not curative. And why? I find in my practice this is really curative. And I said, look, we need to say this thing because not everyone is like you. Not everyone has put it into practice. And so, also to abide to what's the current status. In no country in the world in this moment, cannabis is prescribed or can be prescribed as first line.
Right.
I wrote a paper a few years ago on proposing modulators of the endocannabinoid system as first line for irritable bowel syndrome, for example. But unless we start to, especially for pathologies in which we don't really have a clear first line, unless we have the courage to start to do it. And I think this courage for doctors can be inspired by our side on, collecting the evidences, putting them together, and also seeing what's the worst that can happen. Like, what is the worst that can happen if you administer PEA or CBD or limonene or whatever that needs to be. So that's usually also for me, it's kind of like the reverse psychology of looking at their worst scenario type of situation. And worst scenario type of situation usually are young people under 18, so a pediatric type of group. Usually people that come from a history of psychiatric disorders and maybe with some cardiovascular issues.
Yeah, just stack it all on,
And maybe even with a metabolic syndrome or obesity. And there, though, it's really beautiful because at the same time, you can show them how the beauty of this, I call it phytocomplex, this complex of molecules contained in this plant, when you understand how each of them actually has a different role on what we said at the beginning of this episode, the endocannabinoidome, then actually you can operate with cannabinoids on a person that has a metabolic disorder, is under 18, has cardiovascular issues, and has psychiatric issues. But probably you're going to really help this person with cannabinoids. But you can really mess it up if you use the wrong one. So that's why we go back to what you're doing, to what I'm trying to do as well, which is education.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you just opened the door. I'm going to check our time here, but we've got just a little bit of time. I want to make sure that we don't gloss over this too much.
Thank you so much.
A lot of folks are not familiar with PEA and OEA, and you just mentioned them. So I want to highlight that because I have a personal connection to these two compounds in my own personal experimentation that I've done on myself because I have some neurological issues and things. PEA and OEA are interesting because they have been available, for instance, in the United States, they've been available as dietary supplements for quite a while, widely available. People have been using them for quite some time, not to mention the natural sources of these things too. And it turns out that these compounds are quite similar to our endocannabinoids. They have different, some overlapping and some distinct targets in the body. So I don't know that I've ever talked about PEA and OEA on an episode. So in the last 10 minutes that we have here, let's shine a little bit of light on these compounds because I think it's really important in terms of opening people's perspectives on kind of what modulating the endocannabinoid system means and the tools that are available to do that, because it really does go beyond our traditional concept of cannabinoids. So how would you describe PEA and OEA and their activities in the body?
So PEA and OEA, they're called simil endocannabinoids, because they're exactly what you just said. They are molecules that we produce as well in our own body. But as you said, and I'm so happy that actually in the United States it's exactly the same thing that over here in Europe, they are free of prescription and available as nutraceutics. Now, I don't really know, apart from neurologists, like very enlightened neurologists that use them for patients with MS, so many doctors that have been using them. I have been recommending PEA as a compound for so many different pathologies, because at the end of the day, okay, so the mechanism of function is not as yet not been completely understood. What we know is that they work on PPAR, they work on FA, so we know some of the targets, but it seems that actually it kind of increases the endocannabinoid tone in ways that we are not completely clear about. It's funny because we should, since the beginning of all of this work has been done from the great Nobel Prize Rita Levi-Montalcini from so many years. So it seems to me pretty absurd that molecules that hold so much promise, they've still been left kind of secluded in a space in which, for example, now probably, okay, companies that are listening to this do this and never quote me for this, but I still haven't seen a single product out there containing a phytocannabinoid together with a single endocannabinoid. And this is what I've been doing actually for rescuing my own GI issues years ago, completely recovered. And why? But it's a great anti-inflammatory. So basically, if I need to give you the basic of what it is and what it does, it's a great anti-inflammatory. Now, inflammation can be such a really broad topic. So that's why it's a molecule that we see they use literally from systemically. I've seen it used successfully from decreasing neuropathic pain and inflammatory pain of different origin, whether that's visceral, whether that's at the CNS. But I also seen compounded formulations of PEA for topical use. And this has been tested as well, and it's pretty useful for something like atopic dermatitis. So inflammation can result in so many different pathologies. So far, pretty much anything I've seen it tested on, it kind of hold the promise for great success. For example, three years ago, there was as well a clinical trial in south of Italy with PEA used for COVID patients, and also worked really well. And I actually used PEA for myself and my family in early stage of COVID, and it worked perfectly. So, of course, I'm not recommending this for late stage and everything, but inflammation at the beginning can be rescued by PEA. And one of the great things about these compounds, as you said, is that because they are nutraceutic and because we produce them, you don't really have side effects.
Yeah.
And this is a really good part because, of course, when we talk about cannabinoids, the type of side effects that that can show up are not particularly severe, although things can happen, like the case of that FA inhibitor and the whole tragedy around the clinical trial and the FA inhibitor and so on. Or as you remember as well, the whole tragedy around CB1 antagonist with the rimonabant withdrawal. So cannabinoids can potentially, create issues, but not compared to like the majority of drugs and compounds that we look at in medicine, they're pretty safe. But when you look at things like PEA, for me, is one of the absolute safest, especially when compared to cannabinoids and terpenes as well, because terpenes, I think there is this idea of terpenes because they are, they're the aroma of plants, they're like aromatherapy. Some people think that they just don't work, okay? And then some other people think that they work, but in a sort of like magic way.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for sure, because they come from the plants, they're not dangerous. But actually, I've seen people hospitalized because they tried to drink some essential oils
Oh yeah.
with
Yeah.
their esophagus completely burned out, burned,
Yes.
you know. I
Yes.
remember myself when I was using pure terpenes in the lab. There in Italy, no one in there was working with terpenes, so I started my job and I was using plastic pipette.
Uh-huh.
And then
Yeah.
just to realize that I could not use plastic pipette, I could not hold Eppendorf with terpenes because everything was going to melt. And I was at the beginning, I was like, what am I doing wrong? What's going on in here? What's happening?
Yeah.
No, it's just the terpene. Like I need to use glassware. This is what's happening.
That's
So
right.
and I think this is a really good just example of how sometimes we are underestimating the not only the potential but also what really compounds are when they come from nature.
Yeah.
And so in
Yeah.
this sense, going back to PEA and OAA, which I haven't seen sold, at least in my country, but I don't know whether in the States it's sold as well.
It's not as
That would be
common, but
super
you
interesting.
can usually hunt it down online. But there's always questions about how well the quality control is established there. It is a lot harder to find.
But yeah, I think in these two with these two compounds is really going back to, well, we are producing this thing. Actually,
Yeah.
we don't
Hmm.
produce any limonene, you know. Although, of course, if we go back to the old geranyl pyrophosphate
Yeah.
father, yes, okay, from there and from the first, well, from farnesyl pyrophosphate, so going down that
Yeah.
cascade, then you go into a mevalonate pathway, and yes, that's stuff that we do in our body, but that's gonna be like our, side for insulin and so on. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a little bit different. And I know that for some people, maybe outside the old chemistry realm, adding just a couple of carbons here and there doesn't look like a huge difference, but yeah, it can be a huge difference.
Well, even the
So
chirality of these things, can make such a big difference.
exactly,
Um,
exactly.
it's I think people underestimate, just how different, staking on the concept of terpenes, just how different a terpene can be depending on which enantiomer of it you are working with, both in its aroma as well as potential pharmacological effects. It can be, the left hand and right hand. It matters which one you're working with.
Totally. So no, I'm happy that the whole terpene conversation is raising more and more attention, although I think probably not the right type of attention. And I look forward to finally, maybe in the future, also other molecules that are present in the plant
Hmm.
that have amazing, just for once, antioxidants. Even if we just
Yes.
want to
Yeah.
look at just that, the free, getting rid of free radicals effects like flavonoids
Yep.
are hopefully gonna get more attention. I think, the fact that the cannabis plant, yes, has so many different terpenes, but at the end of the day, all of these terpenes are produced also by any other plant, not
Right.
any
Right.
other plant, but like other
They're.
plants.
Yep. Hmm.
They're in common with other plants, right? But I think the really fascinating part is when we look at flavonoids, actually, yes, we discovered less than terpenes, way less, but we already discovered as well two classes of flavonoids that
Yep.
are exclusively produced by the cannabis plant, and that is extremely fascinating. From 1981 or 1980 anyway, there was this publication from Professor Appendino on CFA
Yeah.
and its anti-inflammatory properties that is really outstanding, like just showing how much better than aspirin it was. And we are here in 2023, and I cannot buy any CFA capsule, can you?
Right. Right.
But I can buy aspirin like quite
Yep.
easily. So I mean, what's missing? Is it missing buyer, Or is it
I've
missing the
wondered.
efficacy of cannabis and its compounds?
I've really wondered that. What is the missing force here? Because I've thought the same thing. I thought people would be, sort of excited and hyped up about flavonoids about 5 or 10 years ago, and
Yeah,
it's like it's getting there, but it's still dragging. And I know there's some limitations in terms of, on the, my background in the testing lab side. For a while, it was just hard to get reference standards for things, and so it's hard
yeah,
to, actually give producers good information on whether these products they're making are what they think they are. Although now, things have come a long way. A lot of chemical providers have standards for all these things. So I really hope we see more creativity. And, going back to what you mentioned, not many people are mixing phytocannabinoids with these, kind of endocannabinoid congener
yeah,
compounds,
yeah.
and making these interesting formulations. If anyone listening wants to hire me as a consultant, I've had these thoughts for a long time of these products that need to exist.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's a
I feel
shame.
you so much.
It's like, come on. And then I
But
remember,
this is, I think you're touching exactly, sorry to interject,
no,
but
go
you're
ahead.
touching the point. This is what I said when I was talking about what's the problem. The problem is within our own industry, because if our own industry continues to hire people that are coming with a Coca-Cola and oil background, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
they're gonna continue missing out on what's in their face, actually,
Yes.
because this
Yeah.
stuff has been on our face. And for anyone like yourself and myself that actually has been observing the physiology of the endocannabinoid system and the plants, it's kind of like,
At
yeah,
this
we
point,
have
it's like
folders
old. It's
full of
becoming
ideas.
old.
It's
Yeah.
like,
It was like, this isn't
yes,
even new anymore.
why can I not buy it somewhere already, no? And they're still there trying to figure out what's the best packaging for, or shall I call it, yeah, here in Europe now, it's starting this trend of calling medical varieties with Kali names so that they
Yes.
sound more appealing to people. And I'm just like, seriously, is this how we're making medicines? Like
Exactly. This is what we're
calling
spending
gelato
our mental
things?
energy on.
Like,
Yeah, I know. There's the
so yeah, companies listening, like actually start to hire someone that understand the topics. And when you're thinking that you're having such a great idea, getting the amazing consultant on whatever your marketing, that's great. But your marketing stuff that actually does not make sense most of the time because you haven't done the R&D done properly with someone that actually understands it. And this reflects, I'm sorry, but this has been reflecting for now all of these years of this industry, which is
yes.
new and that moves fast. But in this moving fast, I don't see it really progressing, unfortunately.
It seems to be kind of spiraling right now. It
Yeah,
is. It seems like the wheels are kind of stuck in the mud and spinning, and it's I hope we see some traction. And I know we need to wrap up, but I wanted to note, sort of highlighting this whole thing of like, why have they not done this or this or this? It's a shame. I saw the passing of Raphael Mechoulam recently, and the only conversation I was able to have with him while he was alive was through email, and we were talking about how weird it was that no one was even feeding humans anandamide yet. Like, how is it that we've studied all these things, but no one's doing just even basic clinical work to see what happens if you feed a human anandamide or 2-AG? Um,
wow,
it's
yeah,
just really
yeah,
basic, really super
yeah.
basic. And he that was something he commented. I was like back in 2020 or so. He said that was something that he really hoped we would progress through faster. Just start. Let's see what happens. We know these things. They're made in our bodies. We know how safe they are. Let's start seeing what happens when we start formulating with some of these things, and and make some actual practical progress that gives us a lot of more useful information a lot faster. But I don't know. And this is a good way to cap things off. I hope this gives people
He
a lot to
he has
think
been
about.
he's been an incredible mind, and I am just really gutted that he never received the Nobel Prize,
Yes.
honestly.
Yes. Same. Yeah, I know.
This
Yep.
is just the biggest regret. but I've been year and years over the years always inspired about his classes, his lectures, and I think one of the ones that struck the most for me was actually how I don't remember. I think it was in Poland, maybe in 2016 in ICRS, when he held this key lecture about the differences. You know how we have polymorphism on the endocannabinoid
Yeah.
system, and we have differences on the endocannabinoid system. And so, what he was saying was, perhaps if we look, and now with also with AI and with
Mm-hmm.
better informatic tools, we can put in like huge amount of data. And what if we start to see that actually all these differences are also what characterize everyone's different personality?
Yes.
It was
Yeah.
such
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
loved how it started to intercross, very hardcore science with a very humanistic and, if you will, what's beyond the matter type of science.
Yes. Yeah.
And I found it absolutely fascinating. So I am just upset that he didn't get the Nobel Prize in time,
Yeah.
basically, or that the Nobel Prize people didn't get him on board in time. But I'm just incredibly thankful for the amount of work that this man not only has done, but also the amount of work that he has been recommending us over the years to
Yes.
be doing.
Yes.
Which,
Exactly.
as you said, like in an email conversation with you, and then it talks about, hey, well, maybe in our heads it's like there is no bioavailability of anandamide, but have we tried it yet?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Like, do we actually know? Like, have we actually done this in humans, or are we just making assumptions? That
yeah,
perspective, that was one of the greatest things. He was always able to bring his unique perspective to the whole, conversation, and drive new questions, better ways of looking at things. And yeah, it's crazy that he was not onboarded to get a Nobel Prize. When you look at the history of Nobel Prizes for science, it's obvious that he deserved one, and I think history will definitely reflect that, especially when there's just so many scientists that have been saying the same thing. That this was somebody who clearly deserved it, and just the institutions dropped the ball big time. Um,
yeah, and probably this goes back to the somehow, yeah, somehow there are a lot of governments that are still not so ready for
yeah,
this topic. But someone like him really, for when he started this whole thing, just really took a leap of faith. I
yeah,
mean, they started their work on a block of hashish taken from the police
right, right.
in Israel. So imagine from there, all of the work that we've done afterwards, it comes from there. So definitely there's been this I think shows that when even a single person takes a decision and commits to that decision with seriousness, perseverance,
Mm-hmm.
and commitment, actually great changes can come around. So just don't give up.
Yeah.
Don't give up. Like your thing matters. It's like a little
Mm-hmm.
drop that would carve a stone, but it does matter.
Absolutely, everything's connected, and things trickle out and cascade in ways that are often far beyond our perception, but are very real and affect a lot of people. Well, I think that is a great place to stop this episode. I know I ran you a few minutes past time, but this was
I'm Italian. I
this
can go with the I'm late.
there you go. Well, it's a really great conversation. I've been looking forward to connecting with you and making this happen for a while. I'll throw in the show notes and everything links to all of your work, the book that you have coming out that you mentioned,
Thank you.
and everything else you have going on. So with that, everyone's been
Likewise,
listening.
was amazing for me. Actually, have this interaction with you. I really appreciate intelligent conversation, and
Oh,
you
thank
are
you.
one of these people that finally,
Oh,
finally, I
thank
can
you.
interact through. No, I'm joking. Every day, I have a lot of intelligent conversation with people that is not me, of course. But no, I think it's a rare thing to find, as I said, people that are willing to disseminate actual knowledge. And this is so vital because otherwise we start to disseminate cannabis saves everything and it's a magic potion and all of this stuff. It's actually more damaging to this
Yes.
industry than anything else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. And likewise, really enjoyed having a conversation with someone who already knows what OEA and PEA and all of these other things are. Very, very nice. And I hope everyone listening, I hope you got something out of this conversation. We really hit on a couple of, really big ideas as well as, all of the technical stuff that we went into. So I hope this was valuable, and I look forward to catching up with all of you next time. So with that, everybody, stay curious and take it easy. Bye-bye. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon so you get notified of more videos, and go ahead and check out another video while you're at it.